talking about investment. They are talking about investment facilitation. These two concepts are different. When you are talking about trade facilitation, you take the reality seriously. There is a certain level of trade openness, not pushing the envelope. Can you facilitate trade better by increasing transparency, by streamlining your administration so that you reduce transaction costs? Investment is the same. Countries would have different levels of protection of its own industries. But given that reality, can you facilitate foreign investment better than now? These are the things that the countries should do within BRIC countries as well as countries in the world, so that you have a better chance to take advantage of trade and investment as a powerful vehicle to help you to gradually climb up the technology ladder. Because technology is very important. After all, growth is a recipe of resource, people, technology.
Well, I think going back to this familiar theme, it's more than just that. And I think Xi's emphasis on understanding each other in order to do business is very, very important. The people-to-people exchanges, offering the 40,000 jobs, the 500 million, all of these things play into that. You cannot create a whole unless the pieces are connected. And right now, one of the biggest obstacles is that these countries don't know each other that well. Mm-hmm. If you ask somebody in China about Africa, South Africa, they really wouldn't be able to tell you much. Mm-hmm. And that would go true for all of these countries. So while you're pursuing these things, you have to have a kind of holistic view of the realities. And I would agree with my colleague that they are putting the means and methods there. There's a lot of attention being paid to it. It's interesting to see the international reaction to this, though. I mean, it's not even being covered in the U.S. I mean, it's just a couple of little things that it's happening.
Is it because they don't care at all, or is it because they're reluctant to care?
Well, right now there are other things on their mind with North Korea, but it's even there. It's this idea they don't really know that much about China. If you ask them, I think it's the other day somebody saying, "Oh, we should bomb some country." Can you point to where it is? No. They were pointing to Canada, at Russia, places. It was very bizarre. For most people, it's just beyond their everyday life to understand other countries. But for business, it is essential. Yes. I mean, the trade facilitation services, what that really means is you want to do this and do that. Here are a group of people who can provide those services, and you can negotiate with each one. It's not you have to go through this one. It's not a monopoly.
To add nuance to the picture of the United States, United States is a very complicated country. There are a group of people who stands for globalism. There are a group of people who stand for nationalism, ultra-national. President Trump so happens stands for nationalism, ultra-nationalism. But then if you look at the U.S. history, there will be ups and downs. And if we are confident about the vision of a community, of a shared prosperity and the future, we should be confident that when you stand for globalism, when you stand for a multilateral system, these are the things that represent historical trends. There may be blips in the process. So not just because you see Donald Trump that you should change those fundamental principles. And it so happens partly because of the lesson we have learned from our experience of reforming ourselves to a more market-oriented system and opening up to a global system. We have benefited a lot, and we should not forget those lessons, and we should also spread those messages to the rest of the world. Be confident as long as
China wants to build a common destiny for every country, for everyone in the world. And talking about the U.S., actually, there is a rising protectionism in the country. That's why Donald Trump actually got elected, and there is a rising trend of protectionism in Europe as well. Is that the catalyst for countries like Mexico to try to join BRICS?
Well, I mean, right now Trump is fighting with his top three trade partners. He's threatening to shut down NAFTA, which is Canada and Mexico. He's threatened to go against China in some trade war. It's insane. There's no way you can do this. The U.S. still exports over $2 trillion, and the U.S. economy depends on that. For him to say that he's going to end that, or he can force favorable terms on everybody, this is a throwback to the days when the U.S. was a monopower. It is not that situation anymore. The U.S. does not have hegemony. So it's the U.S. is going through a learning period. We are trying to figure out exactly where our place is. I don't know that our leaders, even Barack Obama, was not clear in articulating exactly where the United States was fall. There is too much emphasis on American exceptionalism, that we know best, that we've arrived at the ultimate system of government, and we will brook no challenge to this. And if you don't follow, then somehow you are against us and potentially an enemy.
He did scrap deals like TPP. Will that disappointment actually push Mexico to
absolutely,
countries?
Absolutely. I mean, all around the world. And you're seeing this in South America. Chile recently joined the AIIB, and they're now signaling that they would like to be part of the Belt and Road. Now, Chile, by no stretch of imagination, was part of the original Silk Road, but you have the same interest coming from Brazil, already from Brazil, and other South American nations, including Argentina. They have to look east. When they look north, all they see is a wall, or a potential wall that somebody wants to build. They have been basically marginalized as people and economically. If you start looking at how much aid the U.S. has given over the past 20 years, China does that in one. Right? This is literally the situation, the public aid thing. So, yes, South America feels marginalized. They have nowhere else to turn. And I almost guarantee that Mexico will be looking to balance its relationship internationally because they have no choice. There's uncertainty in Washington, and when they come here to China, they see somebody who's saying the same things consistently, and not only saying it, but putting it together with the, as you pointed out, the means and methods of achieving this, and putting yuan behind it.
Right.
The concept of protectionism, the rise of protectionism, also derives from the poor understanding of such concepts like a product made in XYZ country. That probably was a valid concept in traditional global trading system, where a product from A to Z was made in one country, and the product B was from A to Z was made in another country. Then you trade. But the modern version of making a product is a design was made in country A, intermediate parts were made in country B. Right. Then the final assembly probably was made in China or in Mexico and other things.
Not just B.
Okay,
B through J.
Okay.
From
A all the way to Z.
Yes. Especially with the advanced technology and transportation, like the way that Aina Tangen just said, TIR system, something like that. So globalization is unavoidable. And a very important topic of this year's BRICS is to talk about BRICS Plus, right? So this is a very key message sent by the BRICS grouping this year. How big will BRICS be? How many more letters are we going to see behind BRICS?
Well, I don't know that you're necessarily going to see a radical change in the grouping at the top, but there has to be some sort of allowance. But this is one of the areas where there is perhaps some tension within the group itself. Some are saying, look, no. Let's keep it small where we can do it. Look what happens when you have a large group. We don't want to turn into the United Nations. We don't want to supplant it. We're simply doing what we can to help each other. We have a balance of markets and resources. Let's do that. Others, like China, is saying, look, we cannot be exclusive. We cannot turn into the G7 and say we are trying to make the decisions for the rest of the world. And so China is very dedicated, and you can see from the grouping that they brought, because these were all invited by China, Each host country can invite who they want. China made it's a very South-South group. This idea that they want, there's an underprivileged, underperforming South that lacks infrastructure. If they have the infrastructure and they have access to markets, there's the possibility that they could do very well. And this is that shared commonality of vision, purpose, and future.
I guess no one in that group would reject the idea that we are doing this to fulfill sustainable development goals. And as part and parcel of fulfilling the goals, it makes sense to talk about strengthening cooperation within the BRIC countries as well as beyond BRIC countries. So to me, my take of that is a logical extension of the things that those countries have all been doing. Incidentally, these countries are also part of G20,
right.
20. But for this particular occasion, you focus on group of countries, then you add a plus to the 5 countries. It all makes sense.
Then these.
But then I guess all 5 countries agree to that recipe, but probably with different levels of enthusiasm. It's very natural for different countries.
Then
it's a concentration of purpose. When you have everybody included, it's very hard to get anything done.
Yes,
if you have a smaller group, you can move very quickly. Even with just 5 members, it is not always easy to reach a consensus.
Right.
Including more is more difficult. That's why I'm saying that you'll probably a structure, but there will be some voice that's coming up from the rest of the things. I don't think they want to be exclusive.
So the BRICS Summit is never limited to economic issues. Regional or even global security issues are on the agenda as well. Especially the recent nuclear bomb test by the DPRK. How do you see BRICS' role in resolving or discussing about at least those regional or global security issues?
Well, I think India and China in the recent standoff showed exactly what is capable. No one died, all right? Some rocks were thrown. If that is the worst thing that can happen on a border, yes, this is a new model for doing it, and it stresses diplomacy, government-to-government talks, sitting down and looking at what are the best interests of the countries long term. I mean, all of this was settled before this BRICS meeting. Why? Because it was necessary for both countries to put aside what it amounts to a cow pasture in order to figure out what the future of their countries will be. So prioritizing is really, really important. With the DPRK, the idea is that you have to have some way of using diplomacy to do that. But you have 2 individuals who seem intent on driving their trains on the same track, head-on, full speed at each other. China's trying to be a switchman. They're trying to prevent these guys from banging into each other, but it's very difficult. There has to be.
Okay, let's now go to Xiamen to take a look at the site over there where Chinese President Xi Jinping is to give a briefing to the press. President presented at the BRICS Summit in the city.
尊敬的习主席。各位来宾、记者朋友们，大家下午好。
Friends from the media, good afternoon. President Xi Jinping of China's press conference now starts. Now I invite President Xi to make the statement.
Friends from the media, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It gives me great pleasure to meet with you and give you an overview of the BRICS Summit and the dialogue of emerging market and developing countries. The BRICS Xiamen Summit was concluded successfully yesterday. Under the theme BRICS, Stronger Partnership for a Brighter Future, Leaders of our 5 countries on the current international situation, global governance, and BRICS cooperation had in-depth exchanges of views and reached broad consensus. The summit adopted the BRICS leaders' Xiamen Declaration, which reaffirmed the BRICS spirit of openness, inclusiveness, and win-win cooperation, reviewed the successful experience of BRICS cooperation over the past decade, and mapped out a new blueprint for strengthening BRICS partnership and deepening practical cooperation across the board. During the summit, the Chinese side hosted the Dialogue of Emerging Market and Developing Countries. The leaders of BRICS countries, Egypt, Mexico, Thailand, Tajikistan, and Guinea, attended the dialogue at our invitation. Under the theme, Strengthening Mutually Beneficial Cooperation for Common Development, leaders discussed ways of enhancing international development cooperation and agreed to forge broad-based partnership and speed up the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development for the common development of all countries. When BRICS cooperation started a decade ago, amid profound changes in the international landscape, it received a lot of attention from the international community. Having stood the test of major challenges, including the global financial crisis, BRICS countries have embarked on a new path of promoting solidarity and win-win cooperation among emerging market and developing countries. Leaders are determined to take the Xiamen Summit as a new starting point, renew the commitment, and work even harder for a closer, broader, and more comprehensive strategic partnership, and for another golden decade of BRICS cooperation. We BRICS leaders believe that the world today is undergoing profound and complex changes. While the world economic outlook is improving, all sorts of global challenges continue to emerge. As nations with major influence, BRICS countries must step up communication and coordination on important issues and work for a more just and equitable international order. We must play a constructive role and uphold the basic norms governing international relations and international fairness and justice. We must work together to address global challenges, promote open, inclusive, and balanced economic globalization that is beneficial to all, speed up global economic governance reform, increase the representation and voice of emerging market and developing countries, and create an enabling external environment for the development of all countries. We BRICS leaders believe that practical cooperation is the root of BRICS cooperation. A tree will only flourish when its root goes deep. We will, in line with the principle of mutual benefit, step up macro policy coordination, synergize development strategies, and deepen all-round cooperation in areas such as economy, trade, finance, industry, and sustainable development so as to bring about interconnected development. This year, BRICS practical cooperation has made new headway and gained even greater importance. We have developed cooperation roadmaps in areas such as trade facilitation, trading services, currency swaps, local currency settlement, and public and private partnership. We have set up the African Regional Center of the New Development Bank and put together the BRICS Innovation Cooperation Action Plan. Thanks to our efforts over the past year, we have made new strides towards greater connectivity in trade, in investment, in currency and finance, and in infrastructure. We all stress the need to place more emphasis on innovation, seize the historic opportunities offered by the new round of industrial revolution, and improve economic structure at a faster pace so as to secure more resilient, sustainable, and quality growth for all. We BRICS leaders believe that it is in our common interests to deepen political and security cooperation and enhance mutual strategic trust. This is also what the international community expects us to do. Since the start of this year, we have had in-depth exchanges of views and reached important consensus on such issues as the international situation, global governance, international and regional hotspots, and national security and development. The meeting of high representatives for security issues and the first foreign ministers meeting we held this year have injected fresh impetus to closer political and security cooperation. We have instituted regular consultations among our permanent representatives in New York, Geneva, and Vienna to coordinate positions on major issues of common interest. We are making steady progress in our cooperation on counterterrorism, cybersecurity, peacekeeping, and the Middle East. All these efforts have raised the profile of BRICS. We support efforts to continue the good momentum of political and security cooperation, and we will play our part and contribute more to world peace and stability. We BRICS leaders believe that the long history and splendid culture of our respective countries are our valued assets and must be cherished. This year has seen flourishing people-to-people exchanges and cooperation among our 5 countries. Colorful events like the BRICS Games, Film Festival, Cultural Festival, high-level meeting on traditional medicine have proved popular with our people. We are also advancing cooperation between our legislatures, political parties, think tanks, young people, and local authorities to create platforms for people with different background to participate in BRICS cooperation. We support efforts to institutionalize people-to-people exchanges, as they will contribute to greater mutual understanding and friendship and base the idea of partnership on more solid public support. At the summit, we BRICS leaders share the view that as BRICS cooperation enters its second decade, institution building has to move forward in keeping with the changing times if we are to secure strong support for deeper and more substantive cooperation across the board. We support a stronger mandate for our Sherpas and expect them to take stock of the follow-ups to every summit at regular intervals and explore new ways and paths of BRICS cooperation in order to bring our 5 countries closer together. As a matter of fact, this year we have already made new progress in BRICS institution building. I have mentioned the first formal foreign ministers meeting and the regular consultations among our UN permanent representatives. In addition to these 2 examples, we have also set up cooperation platforms such as a model e-port network, a working group on e-commerce, and alliances of museums, art museums, and national galleries, and libraries. These new mechanisms will lend strong support to our efforts to deepen political, economic, and cultural cooperation. Next year, South Africa will assume the BRICS chairmanship and will host the 10th BRICS Summit in Johannesburg. We trust that next year's summit will yield fruitful outcomes. China is ready to work with others to give full support to South Africa in hosting the summit and work together to move forward BRICS cooperation. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a fine tradition for BRICS to conduct dialogue and cooperation with other emerging market and developing countries. Under the current circumstances, such dialogue and cooperation have become all the more important. The dialogue of emerging market and developing countries hosted by China has sent a strong message for closer South-South cooperation and global development cooperation. Leaders attending the dialogue agree that emerging markets and developing countries who enjoy good growth momentum are well placed to play a bigger role when it comes to implementing the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and improving global economic governance. We need to deepen South-South cooperation, create a BRICS Plus cooperation approach, reach out extensively to other countries, and establish an open and diverse network of development partners. Together, we can blaze a sustainable path featuring innovative, coordinated, green, open, and shared development, and inject more positive energy to global growth and shared prosperity. To conclude, let me take this opportunity to thank other BRICS leaders and friends from the business, think tank, cultural, and sports communities for your strong support for China's BRICS chairmanship. My thanks also go to the friends from the media who have been working really hard. I know that about 3,000 journalists have been working here to cover the event. I believe that with the concerted efforts of our 5 countries and people from different sectors, there will be bright prospects for our cooperation and for the development of BRICS countries. Those are all I have to say. Thank you.
谢谢习近平主席，记者会到此结束，谢谢大家。
Thank you for coming.
Right, that was the press conference given by Chinese President Xi Jinping. He briefly introduced what the 5 BRICS countries and also the 5+ countries did in the past few days since the summit began. And again, he stressed that those countries will stand firm in upholding a fair and equitable international order based on the central role of the United Nations. And he also mentioned the economic goals of the 5 countries in the near future and also the consensus reached by the leaders of the 5 countries in that regard. And other than economics issues, a security issue is also a very important part on the agenda, and the further cooperation